open, and a moment later they were skimming through the dusk. "There," said Rosemary. She had a feeling of triumph as she slipped her hand through the velvet strap. She could have said, "Now I've got you," as she gazed at the little captive she had netted. But of course she meant it kindly. Oh, more than kindly. She was going to prove to this girl that wonderful things did happen in life, that fairy godmothers were real, that rich people had hearts, and that women were sisters. She turned impulsively, saying, "Don't be frightened. After all, why shouldn't you come back with me? We're both women. If I'm the more fortunate, you ought to expect—" But happily at that moment, for she didn't know how the sentence was going to end, the car stopped. The bell was rung, the door opened, and with a charming, protecting, almost embracing movement, Rosemary drew the other into the hall. Warmth, softness, light, a sweet scent, all those things so familiar to her she never even thought about them, she watched that other receive. It was fascinating. She was like the rich little girl in her nursery, with all the cupboards to open, all the boxes to unpack. "Come upstairs," said Rosemary, longing to begin to be generous. "Come up to my room." And besides, she wanted to spare this poor little thing from being stared at by the servants. She decided as they mounted the stairs she would not even ring for Jean, but take off her things by herself. The great thing was to be natural. "And there!" cried Rosemary again, as they reached a beautiful big bedroom with the curtains drawn, the fire leaping on her wonderful lacquer furniture, her gold cushions, and the primrose and blue rugs. The girl stood just inside the door. She seemed dazed, but Rosemary didn't mind that. "Come and sit down," she cried, dragging her big chair up to the fire. "In this comfy chair. Come and get warm. You look so dreadfully cold." "I daren't, madam," said the girl, and she edged backwards. "Oh, please," Rosemary ran forward. "You mustn't be frightened. You mustn't, really. Sit down, and when I've taken off my things, we shall go into the next room and have tea and be cozy. Why are you afraid?" And gently she half pushed the thin figure into its deep cradle. But there was no answer. The girl stayed just as she had been put, with her hands by her sides and her mouth slightly open. To be quite sincere, she looked rather stupid, but Rosemary wouldn't acknowledge it. She leaned over her, saying, "Won't you take off your hat? Your pretty hair is all wet, and one is so much more comfortable without a hat, isn't one?" There was a whisper that sounded like, "Very good, madam," and the crushed hat was taken off. "And let me help you off with your coat too," said Rosemary. The girl stood up, but she held on to the chair with one hand and let Rosemary pull. It was quite an effort. The other scarcely helped her at all. She seemed to stagger like a child, and the thought came and went through Rosemary's mind that if people wanted helping they must respond a little, just a little, otherwise it became very difficult indeed. And what was she to do with the coat now? She left it on the floor, and the hat too. She was just going to take a cigarette off the mantelpiece when the girl said quickly, but so lightly and strangely, "I'm very sorry, madam, but I'm going to faint. I shall go off, madam, if I don't have something." "Good heavens, how thoughtless I am!" Rosemary rushed to the bell. "Tea! Tea at once, and some brandy immediately!" The maid was gone again, but the girl almost cried out, "No, I don't want no brandy. I never drink brandy. It's a cup of tea I want, madam." And she burst into tears. It was a terrible and fascinating moment. Rosemary knelt beside her chair. "Don't cry, poor little thing," she said. "Don't cry." And she gave the other her lace handkerchief. She really was touched beyond words. She put her arm round those thin, bird-like shoulders. Now at last the other forgot to be shy, forgot everything except that they were both women, and gasped out, "I can't go on no longer like this. I can't bear it. I can't bear it. I shall do away with myself. I can't bear no more." "You shan't have to. I'll look after you. Don't cry any more. Don't you see what a good thing it was that you met me? We'll have tea, and you'll tell me everything, and I shall arrange something, I promise. Do stop crying. It's so exhausting. Please." The other girl did stop just in time for Rosemary to get up before the tea came. She had the table placed between them. She plied the poor little creature with everything, all the sandwiches, all the bread and butter, and every time her cup was empty she filled it with tea, cream and sugar. People always said sugar was so nourishing. As for herself, she didn't eat. She smoked and looked away tactfully so that the others should not be shy. And really the effect of that slight meal was marvellous. When the tea-table was carried away, a new being, a large frail creature with tangled hair, dark lips, deep, lighted eyes, lay back in the big chair in a kind of sweet languor, looking at the blaze. Rosemary lit a fresh cigarette. It was time to begin. "And when did you have your last meal?" she asked softly. But at that moment the door handle turned. "Rosemary, may I come in?" It was Philip. "Of course." He came in. "Oh, I'm so sorry," he said, and stopped and stared. "It's quite all right," said Rosemary, smiling. "This is my friend, Miss—" "Smith, madam," said a languid figure who was strangely still and unafraid. "Smith," said Rosemary. "We are going to have a little talk." "Oh, yes," said Philip, "quite." And his eye caught sight of the coat and hat on the floor. He came over to the fire and turned his back to it. "It's a beastly afternoon," he said curiously, still looking at that listless figure, looking at its hands and boots, and then at Rosemary again. "Yes, isn't it?" said Rosemary enthusiastically. "Vile!" Philip smiled his charming smile. "As a matter of fact," said he, "I wanted you to come into the library for a moment. Would you? Will Miss Smith excuse us?" The big eyes were raised to him, but Rosemary answered for her. "Of course she will." And they went out of the room together. "I say," said Philip when they were alone, "explain. Who is she? What does it all mean?" Rosemary, laughing, leaned against the door and said, "I picked her up in Curzon Street, really. She's a real pick-up. She asked me for the price of a cup of tea, and I brought her home with me." "But what on earth are you going to do with her?" cried Philip. "Be nice to her," said Rosemary quickly. "Be frightfully nice to her. Look after her. I don't know how. We haven't talked yet. But show her, treat her, make her feel—" "My darling girl," said Philip, "you're quite mad, you know. It simply can't be done." "I knew you'd said that," retorted Rosemary. "Why not? I want to. Isn't that a reason? And besides, one's always reading about these things. I decided—" "But," said Philip slowly, and he cut the end of a cigar, "she's so astonishingly pretty." "Pretty?" Rosemary was so surprised that she blushed. "Do you think so? I hadn't thought about it." "Good Lord!" Philip struck a match. "She's absolutely lovely. Look again, my child. I was bowled over when I came into your room just now. However, I think you're making a ghastly mistake. Sorry, darling, if I'm crude and all that, but let me know if Miss Smith is going to dine with us in time for me to look up the Milliners' Gazette." "You absurd creature," said Rosemary, and she went out of the library, but not back to her bedroom. She went to her writing-room and sat down at her desk. "Pretty? absolutely lovely, bowed over